I'm going to go ahead with Exodus chapter 21. And we're going to go to verse 12. And it says, "He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death." This is God's answer to the Ted Bundys and the Jeffrey Dahmers and the Charles Mansons of the world. God values life very, very much. So much so that he said, don't you dare take another person's life. Even if you're angry with them, do not take their lives. God can settle the accounts all by himself. He does not need your assistance to settle an account. So he was saying, you know what? If a person deliberately kills another person without just authorization, that person's history. The end. You got to keep in mind, these people were in the wilderness. Alright? They didn't have the modern jails and the psychologists they have today. They were in the wilderness. And God was trying to ensure the survival of the Hebrew children. So he says, look, you got that dangerous of an individual, you kill him. Be done with it. Alright? Just make sure the evidence is there, but if it is, that guy is toast. So the next time you meet a bleeding heart liberal, you say, look, God himself said kill him. I'm sick and tired of seeing people like Charles Manson living off of our tax money year after year, despite the fact that they're murderers. Murderers don't live off of us. They shouldn't be a burden to our society. They should be gone. The end. So do I support the death penalty? Since God supports it, so do I. Now, God knew what was going to happen next. He knew that there were people, let's say 2 people working on a riverbank. Okay? It was a fast-flowing river. And one guy accidentally bumps the other guy into the river, and the other guy ends up dying. Well, that is not the same as a cold-blooded, sadistic killer. And God knew this. So he says, oh, hold it now. So God says, however, it was the first thing he said right after the last statement. He said, however, if the first guy, he, in this case being he, did not lie in wait, in other words, this was not a premeditated act, they were just working on a riverbank and the first guy bumped the other one off by accident, but God delivered the second guy into the hands of the first guy. Okay? What does that mean? God can actually prevent somebody from dying. But for some reason, God doesn't do that. In this particular case, God says, okay, I'm going to let the guy go ahead and die. He could have stopped it, but he didn't. Then, the word I is here used, but this I is referring to God. So when you hear then you say, okay, I referring to God. God will appoint for you a place where he may flee. So in other words, if you accidentally bump off your friend, you can run to this particular spot, and once you get there, you're safe. And the family of the person you bumped off by accident can't kill you. Alright? But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. Now, in pagan cultures, it was customary that if you ran to a pagan altar and you stood on it, then nobody could touch you. Even if you were a murderer, you couldn't be touched. Well, God had an answer for that. He says, if you come to my altar and you are a convicted murderer, it doesn't matter. My priest will remove you from that altar and you will die. End of story. Now, Exodus 21:16 is what I already had covered in my previous video. He who kidnaps a man and sells him or is found in his hand shall surely be put to death. This was the very scripture that the southern plantation owners and the people who went on those ships and kidnapped all those Africans, both of them, the southern plantation owners and the ship owners who actually sailed the ships and kidnapped all those Africans and brought them back to America, all those people broke that commandment. All of them. That's why we had a civil war. Like I said, you don't break God's law breaks you. And since they were profiting from this kind of suffering, God said that was enough. Okay? And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. You may not like your parents, and that's fine. God has no problem with that. There are times when you have a parent that's just downright mean and disgusting. You don't have to like your parents. God never says you have to like your parents. What he was saying here was you can't put a hex on them. In pagan cultures, you put hexes on people you didn't like. And God says, no, you're not doing that here. Okay? You're not going to say, I wish you were dead. And I curse you to death. God doesn't allow that. You don't say, in the name of God, I curse you to death. Because what's going to happen is God's going to put that kid to death instead. Alright? If men contend with each other, these men are fighting. Alright? And one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but he's confined to his bed. Okay, so here we got two guys fighting, both pick up stones. One ends up hitting the other with one of the stones. But the guy doesn't die, he's just temporarily incapacitated in some way or another. He's injured pretty bad, but he's not dead. If the man rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide him to be thoroughly healed. So, the first guy who strikes the second guy will be liable for the medical expenses of the second guy, and will be liable for the lost wages for the second guy for as long as he's confined to his bed. Once that guy is up and back around moving again, he's not liable for anything after that. Okay. Now, you see where I'm going with this? If the second guy does not have a lifetime injury where he can never work again, then why should the first guy be paying for the expenses of the second guy for the rest of his life? Get out of that bed and get back to work. As soon as you're healed up, go. That's why we have all these lawsuits and lawyers and everything else going on that's just downright absurd. You don't pay a lifetime of injuries if the guy doesn't have an injury that's going to incapacitate him for the rest of his life. God sees to that. Now the next law is, if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Okay? Now this was the poverty slavery I was talking about. Obviously, slavery by kidnapping is not condoned by God, but poverty slavery is. If you go racking up $100,000 in debt and you have no way to pay it back, that's a different type of slavery. You put yourself in the hole, you pull yourself back out, type thing. See what I mean? So it is a completely different situation than somebody just suddenly kidnapping you and forcing you into labor. Alright? So, if a slave owner killed one of his slaves, God said you're going to get punished. So you had to treat the slave nicely. Now was another crime of the slave owners in the South. It wasn't just bad enough that they were guilty of kidnapping and caused the person to go into forced labor, which is wrong, but then on top of that, they were beating their slaves to death. And that was wrong too. More reasons for the Civil War. Alright. You got two guys and they're fighting. And one guy's wife comes out and tries to break up the fight. Not a smart dude. Not a smart idea. Okay? The first thing you should realize is that the two guys are fighting. No woman, especially a pregnant woman, no pregnant woman should try to go out there and try to break up the fight. Get some help, but don't go out there and try to break up the fight. Bad idea. Stay as far away from the fight as possible. But if the guys are fighting and they hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, which, believe me, that's a real bad situation. We have prenatal clinics in our time, but back then they didn't. So the kid could be in real danger because of it. Yet no harm follows. The guys fighting shall be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So if the baby's born prematurely and it comes out okay, no problem. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. If she gives premature birth and the baby dies, the guy dies too. If you murder an unborn child, you're screwed. Okay. Now I'm going to stop there. One of the things you have to realize is if two people are fighting and one brings out a broadsword and says, "Get lost." Okay, so you got two guys fighting. You got person A and person B. And person A decides to pull out a broadsword and says, "Hey, get off my property." The last thing person B should do is try to charge person A. Okay. In that kind of a scenario, if person B is dumb enough to charge person A when person A has pulled out a broadsword and said, "Get off the property," then that's not a premeditated murder.